Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified when new videos are released. This is Scrappy Bear Paw, 12-inch finished. And here is the diagram. And here's what the blocks look like, set block to block. Patch A is a 2-inch finished square. We'll cut 2.5-inch squares. And we'll need 4 patches of the background and 3 patches each of 2 different reds and 2 different blues. So we have a blue here and a blue, and then 2 reds. Here are the AccuQuilt dies if you have AccuQuilt. Patch B is a 2-inch finished half square triangle. We'll cut 2 7/8 inch squares and cut the squares in half once on the diagonal, and we'll have 2 patches. For the white fabric, we need 16 patches. These are for all of the half square triangles. And for the 4 accent fabrics, we need 4 patches each. You could use the half square triangles 2 at a time if you like. If in that case, you'll just cut the squares and you won't cut them in half diagonally. Here are the AccuQuilt dies you can use to cut the half square triangles. And patch C is a 4-inch finished square on point, and we'll cut our square 3 3/8 inches. We just need 1 patch of the white fabric or background, and here is the AccuQuilt die you can use if you have AccuQuilt. To piece the block, we're going to first sew the squares on point, then we'll sew the half square triangles, and then we'll put the block together. Here are all the different fabrics. These are the squares, so we have our 2 reds and our 2 blues and our white, our background fabric. Here are the half square triangle pieces. This is patch B, the 2 reds and the 2 blues and the background fabric, and then the center square on point. The squares will just be used when we're piecing the... What we're going to do first is stitch the square on point. To do this, we'll take 1 triangle of each color fabric, of each accent fabric. The 2 blues will go opposite and the 2 reds will go opposite. What you'll do here is piece these together opposite sides first. We'll stitch the 2 reds together, press the seams, and then we'll stitch the 2 blues together and press those seams. Next, we'll take the remaining B patches and stitch all of these half square triangles. There'll be a total of 16. If you need a little lesson on sewing the square on point, stay tuned for the next segment. It will show you how to piece the square on point with rotary cutting and with AccuQuilt, and it will also show you how to have pretty points once you sew the square on point to other units in the block. Piecing the square on point unit using rotary cutting patches. You have your 4 half square triangles that go on the corners and your large square in the center that's set on point. I like to start by piecing opposite sides first, and what I do is flip this over, center the square on the triangle, matching these edges, the long edge of the triangle and one side of the square. You want to see if these triangles over here on the right and here on the left are roughly the same size. You just kind of eyeball it. So there, I'm going to go with that. Stitch a 1/4 inch from this edge, a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. Do this side as well. Press your seams open, and if you look, these edges extend here, and what I'm going to do now is just trim these off straight in line with the side of the square. Put your half square triangle down with the right side facing up, and then place this in the center, and then check the size of your triangles overhanging here. And what you're going to do here, you will start stitching right here in this V section where this point meets. And this should be a 1/4 inch from here to the edge of this fabric. Start here, stitch 1/4 inch all the way to this side, and you should come out here at the same part on this side. And do that on both sides. And here's what the stitching looks like. And now you're going to press your seams open. And here's the finished unit. Now just trim off these little nubs on the sides. And your unit's finished. Piecing the square on point using AccuQuilt. I like to start by piecing opposite sides first. And you're going to place the half square triangle piece on top. We need to center it. I just kind of eyeball it, and I'm looking at this little triangle of the bottom fabric poking out here. You can barely see it. It's a little triangle poking out here, and then on the other side there's a little triangle poking out here. What you want to do is try to get them as close to the same size as possible. So I'm just kind of shifting it a little bit. And you're going to take it to your machine, and your 1/4 inch should be right here at this point. So you stitch from this point 1/4 inch all the way down, and you come off at this point. And it's more important that you have the 1/4 inch than if you're exactly on the point. And you'll do that for both sides, this side and then this opposite side. Press your seams open. Now we'll flip it over and do the other 2 sides. You take your triangle, and now you have sides that you can match. You see the triangle has the points cut off. These points are going to line up with what we just sewed. So if you look here, you see they line up with this edge, these 2 edges, here, here, and across the top. Now you'll stitch 1/4 inch from that point here all the way down to this other point, and do that to both sides. It's really difficult to see the stitching because I used white thread, but you can see it coming out here, this little tag here and over here. If these don't match perfectly, if it's like it's not long enough, don't stretch this triangle because you'll just make the unit wonky. Just center it as much as you can and stitch 1/4 inch. Now we'll just press it open and it will be finished. And there's your finished unit. At some point when you finish your square on point unit, you'll have to sew something else to it. And you want to keep these points nice and sharp. And sometimes you might be matching it to a seam line or a plain piece of fabric or maybe another point. And I'm going to show you how to keep these points nice. If you've pressed your seam open, you will see where these 3 fabrics intersect and form a point right here. That's your point on the back, and it's also your point on the front. So you can stitch with this part on top, and you'll be able to make sure that your point stays there. I take a pin and put it right there at the point, and then pick it up on this back side. And in this case, I'm going to come down about 1/4 inch and then put that right in the seam line. That way the point will end up right on the seam line. Put your fabric pieces together and line up the top edges or the edges that you need to line up. And make sure your pin is perpendicular, goes straight down into the fabric, like that. If you're at an angle like this, your points won't match. So make sure they're straight, perpendicular to the fabric, and then put it into the fabric. When you start sewing, line up these edges here. Start at your 1/4 inch and sew all the way down, and you're going to aim for this point where that pin goes into the fabric, and you'll know that you're matching the point and the seam line on the back. And straighten your bottom edge again and continue stitching 1/4 inch off. And here's what the stitching looks like if you can barely see it on here with this thread. It goes right across here, leaving the point open. You're not stitching over the point. And then if I flip it over, you'll see it's not exactly 1/4 inch there, but that doesn't matter because what you want is the point to match the seam allowance here. Now just press the seam open and you're finished. We have the square on point is done, so I'm going to put it in the middle of my Prop-It board. And we have all of our half square triangles done. There are 16 total half square triangles, 4 of each. Now we're just going to follow the diagram here and put the block together. So I'll start here in this corner with this blue and choose these blue fabrics and then just start laying them out. Okay, that took a little bit of concentration. Since the square and a square in the middle kind of messes things up, we're going to take and sew these two together and then these two together. So we'll have our double row. Do the same thing for these two over here. Then once these units are all sewn together into the double row, then sew the top units to one row, the second units to the other row, and the same thing here and here. Then once the rows are all done and pressed, then sew the rows together to finish the block. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified when new videos are released.